You're listening to a Mamamia podcast.
Mamamia acknowledges the traditional owners of land and waters that this podcast is recorded on. Hello and welcome to Mamamia Out Loud, what women are actually talking about on Monday the 17th of June. I am Holly Wainwright.
I'm Mia Freedman.
And I'm Gemma Bath, filling in for Jessie Stevens. I host another podcast for Mamamia called True Crime Conversations.
There's loads of murders on this show.
Yes.
Thank God.
But that's a good thing. Mixing it up.
And on the show today, a princess's brave face, the very planned optics of Kate's return to work. And it's a fact, it's never been harder to be a 30-something in Australia, but also millennials are about to get really, really rich. And what's different about the sex scenes you spent the weekend watching? But first, Gemma Bath.
In case you missed it, a name that might be familiar to you, Bruce Lerman. He's expected to appear in a Toowoomba court today for a committal hearing over rape charges. He's been charged with 2 counts of rape dating back to October 2021. Now, we don't know the identity of his accuser, but we know that she is 29 and she allegedly met Lerman at a strip club in his hometown of Toowoomba. She says he gave her a false name, Bryce, pretty close to Bruce. And she alleges that they left the club and went to a friend's house and got into bed together. She told him they wouldn't be having sex without a condom. They kissed and she fell asleep. She claims when she woke up, he was having sex with her and says the next day he took her to get a morning after pill. Originally, when this story broke, Lerman was only referred to as a high-profile man in media reports, but Queensland laws changed in October last year, which allowed us to name him. This is the first time he's appeared in court in person for this matter, and basically this hearing will decide whether the charges will be taken to trial.
That sound you can hear is me, Mia and Gemma biting our tongues just a little bit. And if you're wondering if there should have been any more details in that segment, there are legal reasons why there aren't. In last week's chaotic royal rundown, I told you, gentle listeners, as Out Loud's fancy society correspondent as I am, that Kate Watch was back. It had been 3 months since those edited pictures of the Princess of Wales had made photo experts of the entire world, and we were getting restless. How is she going as she goes through her cancer treatment? Kate listened, clearly, to Mia's gentle urging for an update on her health. And on Friday night, our time, the Prince and Princess of Wales official Instagram account released an image of Kate forest bathing, which is walking in the woods, with some news. She said, "I am making good progress, but as anyone going through chemotherapy will know, there are good days and bad days. On those bad days, you feel weak, tired, and you have to give in to your body resting. But on the good days, when you feel stronger, you want to make the most of feeling well. My treatment is ongoing and will be for a few more months. On the days I feel well enough, it's a joy to engage with school life, spend personal time on the things that give me energy and positivity, as well as starting to do a little work from home. I'm looking forward to attending the King's birthday parade this weekend with my family, and I hope to join a few public engagements over the summer, but equally knowing I'm not out of the woods yet." Catherine was coming back to work, and she did. Less than 24 hours later, in her first official appearance, that is an appearance not in a paparazzi photo taken with a long lens, since Christmas. The next day, you would have had to be entirely out of Wi-Fi range to have missed the photos of her attending the Trooping of the Colour, which is the King's birthday big deal in England. It's like a big military parade, and Prince William was in the parade. He was on a horse in one of those big furry hats. Don't ask me what all that means. Kate looked immaculate, healthy and happy, riding in a carriage with her kids and doing the traditional balcony appearance where she was given prime position next to the King. It would have been knackering, no question, but Kate's appearance was roundly received as a reassuring and joyous display that one of the most famous women in the world is okay. The thing is, of course, she's not quite okay, as she says so herself. Some days she's shit, although she didn't put it quite like that. Mia, did you love Kate's brave face?
I'm so overjoyed, first of all, to see her face. And I know that it sounded silly when I was saying last week, I just want an update. The parasocial relationship we have with people in the public eye who we feel we know is a real thing. I mean, the relationship's not real, but the fact that we care for them and we want them to be okay. I mean, not everybody does, but some of us do. I scrutinised her more than I've ever scrutinised anyone in a public appearance, and I was very observant of myself doing that. I thought the fact that she wore a very fitted white dress or white suit was very interesting. And what I realised is, harking back to something that I read a few months ago when she disappeared, that first photo came out and turned out to be airbrushed. And there's this sense of when the only access you have to someone is looking at them, which is the case pretty much for the royal family, right? We don't know really anything about them. We just know essentially what they look like and what they choose to tell us. So we have to draw a lot of conclusions from what they wear, what their body looks like, what their facial expressions are, and now, of course, lip readers. And there's something about being a princess more than anything else that their value is in their physicality. It's in literally showing up bodily for events, for official things, bringing attention to charities. And so the burden of that, even when you don't have cancer and the whole world is not particularly looking at you, must be unimaginable. And all I could think about was the pressure that she must have been under. And maybe she was like, this is her job. So maybe she was genuinely overjoyed to be out of the house. We've all, been locked down with illness and we know what that feels like. But I felt for all the cancer sufferers, survivors, people who are battling it, who looked at it and went, oh, right.
I felt similarly. I have quite a few people in my family and in my close circle that have just gotten through cancer treatment or are currently going through it. Mm. And when I saw her, of course, I was happy for her, the individual, but I felt a bit sad for my family members at home thinking, I don't look anything like that. In fact, my body, my face, my hair. I compare it to the beauty standards conversation where we look at super skinny, beautiful women and we compare ourselves to that and the expectations we put on that. In the same sense here, cancer patients looking at her going, well, if I don't look like that, am I doing something wrong? Or
letting the side down.
Yeah. I hear that and I have read it. There was a comment in Out Louders from somebody who clearly felt similarly and very understandably, who said, did she get a special type of no hair loss, no grey skin, no mouth sores chemo? Honestly, I wish her well. Of course, she's a mum and a human being, but for the cancer patients who lose every hair on their body and think they'll never look human again, it seems demoralising, not inspiring. And I thought that was really interesting and, of course, entirely valid. But what a lot of people have pointed out is that chemotherapy is not one experience for everybody. And there are plenty of ordinary, in inverted commas, women who have to work through chemo. A lot of women do, and men, obviously, but we're talking about women who have to put on a brave face, as it were, not to the Kate level, but to keep going, keep moving, keep putting their foot forward. And I don't know, I agree that in some ways it's like, oh, but she looks fine. But I think she had no choice. You've got to remember that to get her out of the house that day, whatever Kate looks like on an ordinary Tuesday morning when she's finding it hard to get out of bed, to get her out of that house that day, she has a team. She has literally a team. And their number one job would have been make Kate look like Kate always looks, to reassure everybody that she is fine. That
and that's it, Hol, isn't it? But that's what drives me crazy, is this insistence that women, no matter what we're going through, we've just had a baby, we're pregnant, we're old, we're getting a hip replacement, we're undergoing chemo, we must look perfect. We must look the same. We must be unchanged physically by any experience that happens to us.
I don't think that's necessarily true of this, because I think we really applaud people who publicly come out and show their shaved heads or their mastectomy scars like we do. We really applaud that because it reflects reality. But we're not looking at the royal family for reality. What this whole very, very stage managed return to work, I actually think they've handled it brilliantly. I think that their team has worked out all the messes that they made earlier in the year when they were with the airbrushed pictures and to give them benefit of the doubt, they're in uncharted waters there. But this has been handled brilliantly with the announcement from Kate very quickly before it happened. So there's not too much speculation to be able to build up. But literally her team their brief would have been, she needs to look perfect. And with that amount of effort around you and all the hair pieces in the world and all the makeup teams and anybody can look like that for a day.
Can I clarify also, none of what I'm saying is a criticism, it's an observation.
Yeah,
and I think those two things, it's really important to make that distinction, because it's like she owes us nothing in terms of, could she have come out in a headscarf and would she have done that? Would she have appeared in public if in fact she never had hair? That is completely up to her to decide, and every person has to make their own decisions. But I was interested in this collective relief that you could feel that Kate looks exactly the same and is completely unchanged. And that was like reassuring for the masses, I guess, on some level, but frustrating from a beauty standards point of view that we just never get a fucking break.
But that's why two truths can live in the same world.
Correct.
Like, we can be happy for Kate, but we can be sad for the people that looked at her on the weekend and struggled.
I don't think that's about beauty standards, though. I don't think it's about beauty standards. I think this is very much about royals and about that very, like, at all times, appearance is what matter when you're royals, as you already said, Mia. It's literally their job. And they don't want everybody to freak out. As we know, royal family are on sort of rocky ground at the moment on all kinds of fronts, from the fact that they've lost two very prominent members, to the fact that the king is unwell, to the fact that the whole institution is on the nose. I don't think that we should be looking at this as a straight up beauty standards story. This is very much about the image that they had to project. It's not beyond the realms of possibility that down the line we might get a photo release of a very different version of Kate that's also very stage managed. But the idea that she would go out on the king's birthday looking anything other than how she looked is kind of unimaginable in royal world.
It is, but that's what's depressing to me, that if she doesn't meet that beauty standard, and imagine how this must feel for her, right? If she doesn't meet this beauty standard, best we stay indoors.
Mamamia out loud! We're millennials. We work hard and have nothing to show for it. We're millennials. Our dogs have more followers than you on Instagram. We're millennials. We Google it 60 times a day.
There's good and bad news for millennials this week. The good news is we're potentially about to be really, really rich. Over the next 20 years, millennials are poised to inherit $90 trillion worth of assets and become the richest generation in history, according to the Wealth Report.
You'd be able to buy a few houses with that amount of money.
Holy
But this will only be the case for those who already come from affluent families, which could potentially deepen wealth inequality further. The thing is, this is quite...
Is that the bad news? Because that doesn't sound great.
It's coming.
Oh, there's more bad news.
Because the thing is, this is quite a few years off for most millennials. People are living longer and longer, which is great. I, as a millennial myself, don't even want to think about my parents not being here. But the bad news, here's the bad news, is that there's never been a worse time in Australian history to be a 30-year-old.
Well, you don't want to hurry your parents along because that's a bit rude, but you would like their money.
Yes.
Can I have a question about the 30-year-olds? Because I have also heard this and I have changed my opinion about it since I fought with Jessie about it, because I just didn't want to give her something to feel sorry for herself about. So I recognise that this is a real thing. But when we say the worst time ever, do we mean financially?
I want to play a little grab to start off. It's from the ABC show Gruen last week. Russell Howcroft, he's a panellist on the show. He's also a marketing guru. He said this.
It's a fact that when I was 30, the house cost me 3 times my salary. Now, 8 times plus for a 30-year-old is what it's going to cost you to get into the housing market. It's true that HEX has doubled in the last 15 years, right? Doubled from a $15,000 bill to a $30,000 bill. It's true that a baby boomer paid half the tax that a 30-year-old pays now when they were 30 years of age.
So for context, Russell Howcroft is a Gen Xer. He would be like us. I remember my parents bought their first house together for, I think, $46,000
That is mind-blowing.
in Sydney.
I'm 33 and honestly, hearing Howcroft say that made me feel quite relieved because I thought I was going a bit crazy. It feels like right now everyone in my generation is talking about the cost of living and how hard it is to make those big purchases in our life, like houses and weddings and big life moments.
Because of
it's
inflation.
really, really tricky. And it made me feel quite validated hearing him spell it all out like that, because it feels like we're pushing against a brick wall.
Are we the brick wall?
We're not the brick wall, people. One of the things we have to think about when we have these generational fights, right, is that the reason people get defensive about it, and I get a bit defensive about it as Gen Xer, like when Jessie brought this up before, I'm like, oh, you make it sound like I had it easy. I didn't have it easy. Da, 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 da. And the thing is because there isn't anything you can do about the generation you're born into, right? It's not the boomers' fault that they were the baby boomers. They've just playing the hand that they got. The thing you can change is the thing that made the boomers so successful, which is much better social policies around access to things, like education and keeping it cheap, and like inflation and keeping it down. The problem with this conversation is it too often becomes a generational bun fight, as if we're like the Gen Y and Z are really mad with the boomers, as if they've done something wrong.
I'm not mad at you. I'm really
no,
not.
I know
I'm
that you I know you're not
a millennial. We are not
excuse
boomers.
me.
Just to be clear, people who've come on this podcast as guest hosts have really learnt a lesson the hard way when they have referred to Holly and I as boomers. So you have been warned. That is your first official warning. Strike one.
I know that you personally, Gemma, are not mad, and as Mia says, we're not boomers, we're Gen Xers, the forgotten generation. But
exactly.
Generally it does get like that. You look at the dialogue on social media and it's kind of like, give us your house, boomer, right? That's kind of the vibe. And I understand it, but that's not the solution, is it?
But the solutions aren't
because the boomers
really
are going to
happening.
give you their houses in the end. They are.
But it's Gen X and the boomers that are currently in positions of power to be able to change said social policies, to be able to make it easier for us. So we're not annoyed at everyday boomers and Gen X. I'm annoyed that our governments are ignoring our pleas for help. That's what I'm annoyed at. I'm running my own race as a little millennial in my little millennial pool. I just want to be able to do things. And, you know,
that's why we need more millennials in office. Like, seriously.
Exactly.
Like, you always need a real cross-section of generations. I was hearing over the weekend that they're trying to put an age cap in Congress in the US because it's full of 80 and 90-year-olds. I think that the average age of a senator or a congressman in Washington is like 80.
How are they going to know what a 30-year-old needs and wants?
Well, so they're trying to cap it at like 81, and they don't. Things like childcare and things like legislation around the internet and social media, you need a real cross-section in every parliament of ages, of genders, of socioeconomic groups. It's crucial. In Australia, it's not too bad, but I hear you.
You 100% do, Mia, you're right. But also one of the reasons why this is difficult to grapple with is it hasn't happened for generations, right? The reason why this is such a tragedy, really, and what Howcroft is trying to explain there, and he does it very well, is that for millennials and Gen Zs, this is the first time in 3 generations that the children are going to be worse off than their parents, which is where this inheritance thing comes in, right? Baby boomers inherited next to nothing from their parents because of the Great Depression, all of those things. Gen X, we're not going to get much, right? Millennials are going to get a lot of money one day. They're calling it the Great Wealth Transfer. This isn't only in Australia, it's in America, it's in all kinds of countries. And it's going to be so seismic. You're right, Gem, that on an individual level, this is only going to benefit you if your parents are doing well. But the reason why it's a bigger picture thing is it literally is the first time that your standard of living is going to be lower than your parents by the time you reach a significant point in your career. And so they're figuring out how to handle that. And the argument about whether or not you should be hurrying your parents along is kind of humorous, except it's not, because one of the big conversations is about whether or not boomers and older Gen Xers should be disincentivized to keep hold of their family homes, for example, to force them back onto the market for young people. But then the young people aren't going to be able to afford to buy them anyway. And they just did this survey in Australia about whether or not boomers were willing to drop their lifestyle expectations to help their kids out. And while lots of people are doing that, another lot of boomers are also like, well, no, because I worked really hard for this. And why should I be on 2-minute noodles in my retirement? And that's where all the emotions and the arguments start.
But this is why the bank of mum and dad, people scoff at that and at those headlines, but it's actually such an important part of our current society. I know that I probably wouldn't have had a wedding if I hadn't have had help from my parents. I also wouldn't be in the relatively comfortable apartment I'm in if my parents and in-laws hadn't helped me. Because even though my husband and I are on relatively good incomes, we couldn't afford what is currently out there in the world. We do live in one of the most expensive cities in Australia, in the world. It shouldn't be this tough. And that is why my generation is looking to their parents to help them now not once they die, because now is when we need it. I'm currently trying to build a family, build my life.
It's that idea of giving with a warm hand rather than a cold hand.
Exactly.
I learned recently that something like more than 50% of kids at private schools have their fees paid by their grandparents, not their parents.
Wow.
So it's interesting seeing that privilege entrenched as well across generations.
I think it's a lot to ask a generation to hand over their money. As I say, every generation thinks they did it tough to a point. The boomers will say we worked really hard, but actually what helped them is a lack of debt. And I didn't own a home till I was in my late 30s. It's not like we were all walking around snapping up properties at 22. You know, I think there's like, you've got to have a bigger picture on what is affecting this. And I think you're right, Gem, is that it's more about putting the pressure on the people in power rather than kicking the boomers out of their houses.
But it's not handing over wealth to another generation. It is giving your children and your grandchildren an opportunity to live a comfortable life now. Money within the family. That's what it is.
I hope your parents are listening. I had a funny conversation with my mum yesterday. I haven't seen her for a few weeks because my parents have had COVID, so they've been kind of isolating themselves. And before that, they were away. So we were talking about it, and they were on these antivirals. And you know, if anyone's been on antivirals for COVID, which they recommend if you're in a high-risk group or over a certain age, you can often think you're recovering and then it comes back and you test positive again. Anyway, so it's been a long process. And I said yesterday, I was asking about my dad, and she said, yeah, well, you know, the end is near. And I was like, Mum, you're not that old. Things have got a bit dark.
My grandma
in your
says
house.
that.
And she goes, she laughed and she goes, oh, no, darling, I just meant the end of like our COVID isolation.
I went to the same place as you.
Yeah.
I just have to say something for the Gen Xers though, right? Because one of the things that I struggle with about the bank of mum and dad idea is like, I live in the same economy that you live in, right, Gem? If the expectation now is that not only do I have to work from now until whenever I may or may not retire to pay off my mortgage and live in this economy and feed everybody and drive a car and all those things, but I also have to somehow magically save enough money to give my kids a deposit for a house in the most expensive corner of the most expensive city in the world. It's like, no, babes, you'll be making your own way and you'll be dealing with what you're dealing with. I don't know. I find that it feels like extra pressure.
Oh, it is. And it shouldn't be happening. It shouldn't be happening. But I feel like my generation is screaming at that wall. Let's bring the wall back. The wall is the politicians, the people in charge. And until they change it, this is what we've been dealt.
What can they do? What do you want them to do?
Change the policies, like with the housing market. Make it easier for us to break in. We used to have first home buyers grants. That's no longer really a thing. I didn't get a baby bonus.
I got a baby bonus, and then they worked out everyone was using it to buy plasma TVs. So they took it away.
How much was it?
I think my first one was $3 and my second
joking?
one was $5.
Do you know what I could do with $3,000?
People were, and then like some people were buying like fancy prams because everybody got it,
Who
right?
gives a
Even rich
shit?
people.
Let them buy the fancy pram.
Yeah, no,
I bought
exactly.
mine off fucking Gumtree.
I know.
Although, you know, again, I didn't spend my baby bonus on a plasma TV. It went to trying to have some time off work. It's not true that it all got frittered away. It was like part of it. At that time, they didn't have paid maternity leave. So the baby bonus stood. So again, it's this resentment of like, you guys had it easy. Everyone was giving you money to buy TVs. It's like, no, it isn't like that. It wasn't like that, you know? It's also true that in places like Germany, where there's much less of an expectation that everyone will own their own home, like renting is more part of the culture. They make renting more secure. Because that's another thing, right, is that if you're facing that you're definitely going to be renting till you're in your 40s, one of the reasons why that's a problem, apart from wealth building up, is the insecurity of it. So you can change policies around that. You can change policies around HEX debt, which this government is doing a little bit, but not enough. You can relieve some of the burden of pressure on this generation to be under a pile of debt from the minute they step out of uni.
Trust me, I don't want to take money from my parents. I don't want to. I want to do it all by myself. But it's like, until they change stuff, I am having to take some handouts here and there to be able to pursue what I want in life.
Do you want daily Out Loud access? Why wouldn't you? We drop episodes every Tuesday and Thursday exclusively for Mamamia subscribers. Follow the link in the show notes to get us in your ears 5 days a week. And a huge thank you if you're already a subscriber. There's a sex scene everyone's talking about this week, which is kind of interesting in itself because sex scenes are rarely controversial anymore. The last controversial sex scene I can think of was that time a few years ago when Miranda got finger banged in the kitchen by her new non-binary partner, Che, while Carrie recovered from surgery in the next room and had to wee in a bottle. Do you remember that?
That was a vibe.
That was a real vibe.
Oh, good times.
They were good times. The sex scene in question is from the 3rd season of Bridgerton. And there's a lot of sex in the TV show Bridgerton. We've seen all kinds of sex, including in this season. Why is this particular scene causing such a buzz? And it's not just because it was a 6-minute sex scene. If you thought it went on for a long time, it did. It kind of was the whole sex in real time, which I really appreciated, because sometimes sex can either be really fast on camera or it can seem like it goes sort of for hours in time lapse. Is it a same-sex scene? No. Is it a threesome? No. Oral, anal? No. It's actually a very vanilla, sweet, loving, losing my virginity scene between a man and a woman who are engaged to be married, Penelope and Colin, or Pollen as their portmanteau has become.
Oh, cute.
The reason this scene is, and I don't want to use the word controversial, but maybe surprising is a better word, because I certainly felt surprised when I saw it, is because the actress in this scene is Nicola Coughlan, whose body is not the same size or shape as every other female body that we're used to seeing in sex scenes on TV shows and in movies. Nicola, who stars as Penelope Featherington, has been asked by a lot of media who have referred to her bravery for being semi-naked in that scene because her body is curvier than the type of body that you usually see in a Hollywood sex scene. Here's how Nicola responded when she was asked about her bravery when filming that scene.
You have to acknowledge you are very brave for this role.
You know, it is hard because I think women with like body type, women with perfect breasts don't.
I love that.
Me too.
That's so good. It was such a great clap back. But I think that the question is kind of valid because there is a surprise in seeing that scene. The other thing that was interesting about it is how consent was handled. There were 2 sex scenes, actually. There's another finger-banging scene in a carriage with Colin and Penelope, and that consent is done so well and they're made to look really sexy. I haven't seen that before, where he just looks at her and like raises his eyebrows to say, can I do this? And she nods. And same when they have the actual losing her virginity scene, he checks in with her.
You must tell me to stop if you do not wish for this.
I did not wish for you to stop.
I really loved it. I thought it was amazing. Hol, you were a bit on the fence about this season of Bridgerton. Did you find that scene as horny as everyone else?
I loved it. I've had to issue a formal apology to Mia because when the first half of this season dropped, because they're dropping Bridgerton in 2 sections, on a Friday night I watched the first 2 or 3 and I was like, meh, I'm over this. The whole like, who's the diamond of the season? Who's going to marry who? Whatever. I'm done. It seems so silly. And then I just inhaled this second half over the weekend and loved every bit of it, which leads me to believe I must have been in a very bad mood when I started watching it. Or maybe I was just waiting for the sex scenes and they have not disappointed. I love this. And the thing is that we had a conversation the other week that went on and many Out Louders joined in about beauty standards and about whether or not we should call everybody beautiful. Like the idea everybody's beautiful is a good idea or not. The thing I love about Bridgerton, and they've done it in this season with different body types, but they did it last season with different ethnicities because the sexy female lead last year was South Asian descent, Kate Schwammer, she's called in the show, Simone Ashley in real life. And that was a mixed race couple like the first season was, where this woman was just so beautiful. And I know that Em Vernon wrote a piece about how happy she was to see that reflected. In this one, they've taken a woman who in the first couple of seasons was generally perceived to be a bit of a wallflower and the butt of the joke, and her being a wallflower is a big thing. And they have shot her so beautiful. She is beautiful. She is so beautiful. Her skin, her perfect breasts, as she describes them, and they really are. I absolutely loved it. The thing I think is good about this is even though it's silly and maybe a bit embarrassing that everybody's questioning Nicola Coughlan about how she feels about her body, we're watching beauty standards expanding in real time because women love this. Why do women love it? Seeing this conventionally hot, sexy dude mad with lust for this woman who is not tall, skinny, straight-sized. It's because it makes us feel seen. And she is beautiful.
She's also hot.
She's so hot. But she's also as amazing off-screen as she is on-screen, which is what I love about her. So the script actually called for her to be more covered up than she is in the show. She's the one that actually was like, no, I want to be more naked.
Paint me like your French girls.
Yeah.
It's like, let me be as naked as the other straight-sized women who get sex scenes.
She kind of said she wanted to do it as a bit of a fuck you, which I just think is amazing. And that's not the first time she's been asked that grab that we heard about her body. And it's always journalists that bring up those, words like bravery. But when you actually watch Bridgerton, there's no mention of weight. There's no mention of the fact that that is an issue for Colin or for her. It's just a non-issue. It's just a thing, which is what I think is so amazing.
Shonda Rhimes, who is responsible for this show and Grey's Anatomy and so many other shows, I think she's done more for expanding beauty standards in our culture, in our pop culture and our broader culture than anybody I can think of, because she has consistently done this from the beginning of her career when she didn't have much power, casting Sandra Oh as one of the leads on Grey's Anatomy and having mixed race couples and people of different body shapes and ages and sizes in all of her shows. She's extraordinary, and I think this is yet another example of that. And I love the fact that appearance is never mentioned in this show. It just isn't.
I could see another director, though, taking that story and doing what the books did, which was make Nicola's character, Penelope, lose weight. In the book, she loses weight. She glows up.
She has a different kind of makeover,
Yeah. Whereas she made an actual decision. Well, that's not happening.
Yeah, Shonda wouldn't have been into that.
Well, the only thing is that they might not mention weight directly, but the whole point of this storyline is that she's an unexpected choice for the heartthrob, right? Like her wallflower status is mentioned constantly. The other fancy people on the circuit are all like, oh, as if, So it is referenced. The only thing is, I'm just going to argue against myself for a minute because I was celebrating this so much. But then Mia, when you said paint me like your French girls, obviously I got excited because who doesn't love that? But it made me remember that actually, do these kind of big pop culture moments really expand beauty standards? Because all the way back then in the 90s, when Kate Winslet was Rose in Titanic, the headlines were all about her body. Kate Winslet got very much pigeonholed as a larger woman, someone who is exceptional to the beauty standards of the day. And she was constantly asked about that, being curvy, being larger, which now seems almost ridiculous, but that was the obsession. Then we kind of went back to skinny ladies for a long time. And I know that sounds disparaging, but you know what I mean, that the beautiful heartthrob had to look a certain way. Then remember when Girls came out and Lena Dunham was in sex scenes with this body that we weren't used to seeing naked, and headlines and headlines about her bravery, how remarkable it was that she would consent to be semi-naked on screen when she didn't look like a supermodel. And then we go back to the beauty standards for a while, and then Nicola breaks through. I wonder, do we expand and stay, or do we just expand and contract?
I think that it takes a long time of tapping on that glass ceiling of beauty standards until you break through. And I think that you have to have a creator. I can't speak for Titanic, but you look at Lena Dunham was the creator of Girls. Shonda Rhimes is the creator of Bridgerton, who spend the capital that they've earned from their success and push that through, because it's not easy. Studios don't like it. Marketing team don't like it. It's not a selling point as such. You've got to have someone who really fights for it.
Why don't studios and marketing teams like it anymore, when what this shows again and again, by the way, that when we see it, women are so unbelievably embracing and love it, that it's good for business?
Because there's plenty of people out there that are still of the opinion that it's not good. Even Nicola.
Because men make decisions whole. Like the argument when I used to try to put women of different shapes and sizes on the cover of Cosmo, I had to fight and fight and fight and fight for that. And I kept saying, it's good business. Like, forget about what your personal preferences are. It's good business. But when you're trying to do something different and move away from the norm and put forward a beauty standard that isn't the preferred beauty standard of our culture, of course that's a risk. And no one wants to take risks.
And Nicola's being trolled She's
course
been
she's been
trolled
trolled.
mercilessly.
So
she
she
wrote
is
on
brave.
Instagram, if you have an opinion about my body, please don't share it. I'm just one real life human being and it's really hard to take the weight of thousands of opinions on how you look being sent to you every day.
Yep.
So even though there is one half of society that is celebrating her, and I saw so many women on my own social media kind of putting up Instagram stories being like, oh my gosh, I saw my body on screen. I saw a woman's body with folds and moving in a way that mine moves when I have sex.
Yeah.
So there's that side, but there's still these people that are dropping into Nicola's DMs being like, you're not worthy.
It's also just not the shape of her body. It's the idea of someone being sexual, like being portrayed in a sexual way. Because if you look at Rebel Wilson's career, it's all just about comedy and the butt of the joke. It's never about her actual desire and someone desiring her without a gag. And even someone like Melissa McCarthy, you know, you look at the women who are not straight-sized, who are in Hollywood, and they are played for laughs generally. And that's not a criticism of those women in particular because, my God, there's so little work and it's so hard. Whatever they can do to get roles and work is great. But I think that's the difference here, portraying her as a sexual creature, the same as Lena Dunham.
The massive success of Bridgerton has been that it's saucy scenes, as I describe them to my daughter when she's like, why are you watching that show? And I'm like, it's saucy. That's how I describe it. Anyway, the saucy scenes are always from the female gaze, and that's what people love about them, right? It's the same with Outlander. Female gaze is good for business. But you know who else is being trolled, which is interesting, is Colin, the man who plays Colin, because he was pictured last week with his actual real-life new girlfriend, and she doesn't look like Nicola Coughlan. She looks much more like a very stereotypically hot young thing, and the internet's lost its mind in fury at him. So now it's like, how very dare you not be that? So, you know, our expectations are enormous.
Do you think there will ever be a time when this is not a conversation, where we
I hope so.
don't even have to do a segment like this because it's a non-event?
I mean, I'd like to think that. I just think it's important, without wanting to make things any harder for Nicola Coughlan, it's important to applaud and recognise when something is subversive and pushes the boundaries and support it so that then the next time someone has to make that decision, they also will push those boundaries and push those boundaries. It's always hard being the first. So she's brave.
She's also unquestionably great. You know, like she creates shows. She's a brilliant performer. She's great in this. Like, I'm very glad she's having her moment.
Our entertainment podcast, The Spill, had an interesting conversation about this on Friday. Here's a taste.
Obviously, the character of Colin is a lot more experienced. And
He's very experienced.
And they talk about that in the sex scene.
No.
Which I thought was interesting. This obviously is set hundreds of years ago, but it felt like a conversation you'd almost be having now in modern times about, like, there's a lot of consent in it of him saying, like, I'm about to do this. Is this okay?
A link to that episode will be in the show notes.
Out Louders, sometimes we need each other to help solve dilemmas. We have a segment called Group Therapy where we help solve a dilemma. And this week we solved the dilemma of an Out Louder whose 23-year-old daughter was out for her birthday. Her boss was there and it ended in some really inappropriate behaviour from her boss and a whole lot of other men there. And we had a really interesting conversation, didn't we, Hol?
Yes. I'm not sure we did solve it, to be honest, but like I've been replaying that conversation in my head all weekend. And I know Out Louders have.
Here's a little sneak peek of how it went down.
I can't believe that you said that she should change her job.
What do you mean?
Of course she shouldn't change her fucking job. Like, that's outrageous. Why should he get to keep his job and his sleazy co-workers get to keep his job and she has to go through all the drama and change and trauma of changing a job?
Because
what
I
if
know
she
he will
really
end
likes
up
her job?
keeping his job, and the only person that will get really saddened about this and get really hurt about this will be her.
My first line would be complain about him.
It's not always that simple. If you want to hear what Holly and Vernon and I thought and make up your own mind, we'll put a link in the show notes. You can listen to that right now.
That is all we have time for on this Monday, my friends. A big thank you to all of the Out Louders for listening to our show and supporting it. Tell your friends, share it, tell them all that we're having the best conversations here on Out Loud. And thank you for our team for helping us put together today's show. We'll be back in your ears tomorrow. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.
Shout out to any Mamamia subscribers listening. If you love the show and you want to support us, subscribing to Mamamia is the very best way to do it. There's a link in the episode description.